السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، ناصر المؤمنين المستضعفين، قاهر الطغاة الجبابرة الظالمين، الذي جعل العاقبة للمتقين والعدوان على الظالمين، والصلاة والسلام على إمام الأنبياء والمرسلين محمد وآله وصحبه أجمعين ومن تبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. أما بعد، اللهم انفعنا بما علمتنا وعلمنا ما ينفعنا وزدنا علما وفقها في الدين يا رب العالمين. Alhamdulillah, we're on the 11th part of the history of the land of Al-Quds, of Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa and Al-Sham, the portion which we now know as Palestine. And we covered the name of Palestine and where it came from. And over the sessions, alhamdulillah, we've covered a number of different parts. So as always, we'll start with a quick recap of last week, inshallah. Just before we do, again, we make dua that Allah Azza wa Jal alleviates the suffering of our brothers and sisters in Gaza and the land surrounding Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa. It's now 91 days since the current escalation of oppression on our brothers and sisters has started, and there's no letting in the amount of violence that is being committed until now. In fact, you could say the numbers of shuhada on a daily basis are increasing than the first days of the war. So we ask that Allah Azza wa Jalla alleviate the suffering, remove the oppression, and grant them freedom. Ameen. So if we just a quick recap, inshallah ta'ala, of last week. So in the previous session, we covered a number of points. So we covered the events that took place after the war in 1967. And we said that the war, like in 1948, was called Al-Nakba. This war was called Al-Naksa in Arabic. And as a result of this war and what took place in the years that followed, over 350,000 Palestinians were expelled from their homes into refugee camps within the borders of Palestine. 1,338 homes were demolished, and over 300,000 Palestinians were detained, different numbers at different times between the period of 1967 to 1982. So the 350,000, that's basically 1/3 of the population at the time of the West Bank. So the West Bank had a population of 1 million, 1/3 of them became refugees and to Jordan. And we didn't, obviously there's a lot of detail in there, buses that were arranged by Israel by the Israeli government for Palestinians to go to the River Jordan to cross over into Jordan. Certain announcements were made that Palestinians should go and leave the area, etc. And so there was a mass exodus of Palestinians again as a result of this war. And then we covered the organizations that had been set up by this time. So we mentioned the main organizations that were there. As we said, there were many organizations, but the three main organizations that were there at the time. So we covered Fatah, which is an acronym in Arabic for the Palestinian National Liberation Movement. And this was established in 1959 by Yasser Arafat, and I'm sure everyone here has heard of his name. We covered him in brief last week. And also Abu Iyad was one of the co-founders, and they were a member of the PLO, nationalist organization. They used to carry out attacks, cross-border attacks, a member of the Fidayeen against Israeli targets. And we mentioned the Black September civil war that took place in Jordan from the 16th to the 27th of September in 1970, where all of these organizations were removed from Jordan. We covered the PFLP, which is the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine. The founder was an Orthodox Christian, George Habash. He established the organization in 1967, and he was a doctor. Again, they were members of the PLO. They came out at some time, rejoined again. Their outlook was more socialist, so they had links from or ideas of Stalin, so Marxist, Leninist organization. Again, they had a militant wing or military wing, and they were well known for their hijackings, plane hijackings. They carried about approximately 10, if not more, successful and unsuccessful hijackings of planes at different times. The most, or one of the most famous, was the Dawson's Field hijackings, which we mentioned last week, which took place in September 1970, where 4 planes were hijacked. 3 of them were brought to Dawson's airfield in Jordan, and then those 3 planes were blown up. The passengers were not killed. They were then released, but as a consequence of this, there was international media focus on Jordan, and that's when the war started between Jordan and all the Palestinian groups that were inside Jordan, leading to the killing of over 3,500 Palestinians, and all of these groups being removed. And one of the famous hijackers of this group was Layla Khalid, who currently resides in Lebanon. And then there was the DFLP, sort of an offshoot of the previous organization, Democratic Front for the Liberation of Palestine, established in 1968 by Naif Hawatimah. Again, they were a member of the PLO, but they were slightly different. They were a Maoist organization. So the difference between socialist and Maoist is in terms of the way the revolution takes place. We mentioned it last week. So the socialist viewpoint was that the elite of the working class, they would basically turn against and lead the revolution, whereas the Maoist view was the Chinese view, which was that the working class who are working in the industries and the factories, etc., they will rise up. So it's completely lower roots, and they will rise up and do the revolution. And they had a military wing which was called the National Resistance Brigades, and they continued to carry out attacks against Israeli targets, and they continue until today. So this was last week, and then obviously we covered the PLO, as that was the umbrella organization, continues to be an umbrella organization to represent the Palestinian people until today. So that was set up in June 1964 in Cairo, in Egypt, by the Arab League. The headquarters then moved later on to the West Bank. But again, it's a nationalist organization, umbrella organization of 8 organizations at that time. Its activities then were political and military. Initially, all of these organizations were looking at a one-state solution, so all of the lands should be returned back to the Palestinians. But in 1993, they recognized Israel as a state, and therefore PLO officially works towards a 2-state solution based on the pre-1967 borders, which we've covered already. And then they were involved in cross-border attacks along with the other groups, and they are until today regarded as the official representation of the Palestinians. And again, they were expelled from Jordan with the other groups by 1971. And then we covered in brief all of the events that took place between that time, 1967 to 73, the attacks of the IDF in Al-Karama village, which was a small war that took place, and then Golda Meir becoming the Prime Minister of Israel, the one who said there's no such thing as Palestinians, and then the attack on Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa and the burning of the Mimbar of Salah ad-Din, etc., culminating in the events which we discussed. Inshallah, today we'll cover the event which we discussed last week of the attacks in Munich in 1972. So these attacks obviously became very famous, international media, and this was, or the consequence of these attacks, or this operation that took place, was to bring Palestine and the issue of the Palestinians into the international limelight. So pre this operation and this event, there were people who didn't know what Palestine was, and they had absolutely no idea what was taking place in this far part of the world. So in Germany, as we said, up until this point, especially the hijackings, etc., they're taking place in different countries. They're not all taking place in the Israeli state. So they're taking place all around the world. So this was a major operation, an event that took place, and it took place in West Germany. So the Olympics were obviously taking place in the summer. So this was a summer Olympics, and they had a team from Israel, and they were participating in the Olympics, and they had a number of participants. Now the Olympics by West Germany, their portrayal, or they wanted to portray the Olympics as a non-military event. The reason was the previous Olympics that took place in Germany was when Adolf Hitler was in charge of Germany, the Chancellor of Germany, and therefore he had a massive military parade, etc. in the Olympics. So this time they wanted to give a different view to the world of Germany. Anyway, so the Olympics takes place, and in the second week, so on the 5th of September, this operation takes place, or this event happens. So the plan was that so there were 8 operatives, 8 Palestinians. The plan was that they were going to take the Israeli team hostages and demand the release of 234 Palestinian prisoners and 2 prisoners who were part of the revolution in Germany. So they were Germans completely unrelated to Palestinians, but as we said, there were always connections because of common interests, training, etc. We mentioned last week. So 2 of the Red Army in West Germany were also to be released. That was part of the demands. And the plan was that once the exchange of prisoners take place, and as we said, there's loads of Palestinians being taken prisoner, 300,000 in that period. So 234 is not really a very large number. But anyway, so the plan was the prisoners exchange takes place, nobody gets killed, and they can go back home with the freed prisoners. They go back to wherever they came from, Jordan, Lebanon, wherever they were staying, in Syria, in the refugee camps, the 8 members of the operation, and the hostages will go back. There was no plan to kill anyone. That was the initial plan. Also, to note that the members of the Israeli Olympic team were all serving members and reservists of the Israeli military. Some of them were active, like the 18-year-old who was active in service, and then there were others who were reservists or active in the military. So all of them were military men. They weren't in that. I mean, they were in a civilian role in serving in the Olympics, but in terms of Israel itself, they were all members of the military or reservists. The teams that were taken as hostages, the individuals, they were members of the wrestling team, the shooting team, karate team. So the plan, so 2 of the members, so the leader of this group who did the operation, he called himself Isa. That was his code name. Others had code names such as Paolo, etc. And he was working along with another member of the team as part of the staff in the Olympics. This was a plan that they had from before. And they were all members of an organization called the Black September Organization. Now, Black September was when Jordan attacked all of the Palestinian organizations. So born out of this was an organization called the Black September Organization. And supposedly was set up by Iyad Abu Ali. And now some claim that it was an independent organization. However, speaking the majority of the Palestinians who were either members of it later on and who spoke out afterwards, they said it was an organization that was underneath Fatah. Yeah, so Fatah had obviously a military wing, but they weren't they were more moderate in terms of the way they were attacking Israel. And the other members of the organization, they were joining up, they wanted, because Fatah was the largest organization at the time, they wanted them to be much more violent in the way they approached the matters, and especially after 1967. Obviously the 1948 war, and then the Suez Canal crisis, and the 1967, they basically believed that the Arab armies can't do anything against Israel. They can't defeat them. Every single time they fought, they've just lost ground. And so they said that the only other option is that we hit them where it hurts, do as many operations as we can, as many attacks as we can against as many people, until eventually it forces them to change their policies, and forces them to step back, and eventually somehow we can get rid of this occupation. And so the attacks increased multifold after the 1967 war. Anyway, so they set up the Black September organization. Most likely it was underneath the organization of Fatah, set up to placate those who wanted a more violent operation. But at the same time, Fatah won't be implicated because it's under a different name. And also the members were not really known to anybody. They used to work in very secret cells of maybe 4 to 8 people, and no cell knew another cell, and there were drop-offs in places where nobody knew who was dropping and nobody knew who was collecting the messages and instructions. So it was very difficult to trace. In fact, even the leaders of Fatah or anything else didn't even know who the operatives were. Anyway, so this was a group of 8 and a couple more individuals. The leader or the mastermind who planned this attack, but he was not part of the 8. His name was Abu Dawood, and he gave a number of interviews. Later on, he passed away a few years ago in Syria, and he gave a few interviews after there was a documentary film with regards to this attack that was released, I think 2015, and after that he gave a number of interviews with regards to what took place and his role in planning the whole attack. And I think his whole interview is available on Al Jazeera Arabic. So he explains what took place. So the security was very lax. So the competitors, they used to go out at night drinking, etc., the Western competitors obviously, and they'll come back late night, jump over the fence into their compound, the player's compound, and go to sleep, and they wake up in the morning. So this group, they went out to one of these places where the teams were partying at night, and initially it was said the American team, and this is the most likely team it was, although some say it was a Canadian team, but it was most likely the American team, and they came back. So these 8 of them, they come back with the American team, and they're wearing tracksuits, etc. They've got hold rolls, so sports hold rolls. Now the sports hold rolls are not holding balls or another equipment, they're holding guns and weapons. Anyway, they come back with the American team. The American team are half drunk. They help them over the wall, and so the American team, they help these 8 assailants over the wall, over the fence, into the compound where the Israeli team is based. Then they go towards the apartments where the Israeli team are. They've got a copy of the keys to the rooms, to the 3 rooms on their floor. They go up there, then they start to open the door. They go inside the rooms. Anyway, without going too long into the story, a couple of so one Israeli, he jumps out the window, he escapes. They let him go, and the ones who carry out the operation, they later said, our instructions were that we shouldn't kill anyone unless they started fighting us, and we did it in self-defense. So the one who was running away, we let him go. So they let him go. Then they were attacked by 2 members of the team. The wrestling coach and one other member of the team attacked them. One tried to stab one of them with a knife, and hit them over with the barbells of the weightlifting, etc. So 2 of them were shot and 2 of them were killed. So there were now 11 hostages, and these 11 hostages were in the room. So this takes place at 4:30 a.m. in the morning. They're taken over, they're inside the room, 4:30 a.m. in the morning, 8 Palestinian attackers and 11 hostages. But nobody outside knows how many Palestinians there are. So obviously the news starts going out, a few of them have escaped, the neighboring rooms hear the gunshots, etc. So now the Olympics carry on. The games that are currently ongoing, they are carrying on. Nobody stopped them. And the mayor of Munich, and the interior minister of Germany, they start to negotiate with the attackers. So one of them comes out. I don't want to put the picture up here in the masjid, but he's wearing like a cap, a round bowler hat on his head, some glasses. So they were surprised by his look. Anyway, he has a conversation with them. So the negotiation is directly with the interior minister and the mayor of Munich. And he says, these are our demands. Exchange the prisoners, and they're free to go, we're free to go. We fly back, and the Israeli team are free as well to go. So Germany contacts the Israeli Prime Minister, Golda Meir. Golda Meir says, absolutely no, we do not negotiate with terrorists. And this was the Israeli policy, that they do not negotiate at all in any circumstance. No negotiations, because if they ever were to have negotiations, what that means is that the attackers in any situation have been successful, so they will do another attack. So that they never do another attack, they will have no negotiations. Now Germany, they were negotiating. They offered money, etc. They said, listen, we'll give you loads of money, we'll let you fly away, just leave the team. They even at one point offered to replace the hostages with German hostages, with German police personnel, etc. They said, so the response from the individual calling himself Isa was, we don't care about money, and we don't even care about our own lives. We want to release our prisoners, and that's it. There's nothing else that we want, and you can't change our mind. I give you until 10 a.m. By 10 a.m., you need to have released the prisoners. You need to release the prisoners in Israel. So they have a bit of a discussion. Eventually, he comes back. Now, obviously, they don't know the discussions that are taking place with Israel, because that's behind the scenes. So the Germans say to them that discussions are ongoing. We're trying to put all of the systems in place and trying to organize everything. Just give us a bit more time. So they said, okay, give us a couple more hours. They give them a few more hours. And then in that time, they realized that the Israelis have said, absolutely no. No negotiations. We're never going to release any of these prisoners. So the Germans, they send German police, and they were supposed to go inside the ventilation shaft, to go inside and kill all of the attackers. And so they were wearing plain clothes, tracksuits again, but they had machine guns and weapons. But the whole world's media was pointing towards the building, and they had a television inside the room. So the attackers in the room can see all of these German police with weapons climbing on top of the rooftop. And there's a famous picture from the attack where you can see one of the attackers is standing there, and 6 meters away on the roof of the building is the German police officer holding the gun. And so what they do is they get the body of the one who was killed when he tried to defend, and they throw him over the balcony. And they said, if you don't bring the policemen down now, we're going to throw the people over the balcony one by one. So they quickly called them back. They called them back again. They continued to negotiate. They said, we're trying to work it out, etc. They asked for somebody to go in to confirm that the hostages are alive. So initially they bring 2 of them to the window. Then they said, no, we want somebody to come in. So the mayor is of the Olympic Village, goes inside the room. He looks inside the room. They're all okay. The wrestling referee was also from the Israeli team. He was tied up on a chair because he was really big. The other ones were tied up on the sides. And he said, yeah, there seems to be 4 or 5 attackers. So they come out. The real reason they sent somebody in was to find out how many assailants they were, because until that point they didn't know how many were inside. So he comes out. They said there's only 4 or 5 of them. He said, okay, that's fine. We can deal with 4 or 5. So eventually they agreed. They said, yeah, everything's fine. We're going to allow you to go and fly out of the country. So they said, okay, what's the plan? So initially they said, we're going to send you by bus, or we'll send you by helicopter. So they had all of this was prearranged. The arrangement was that they will fly to the international airport. They will be taken to the international airport. And then from the international airport, they will board a civilian plane and go to an Arab country, most likely Egypt. because that was, if you remember, that time obviously Egypt was anti-Israel. They wouldn't, especially after this war, etc. So most likely they're going to fly to Egypt, and the instructions were very specific from beforehand. From the location where you are to the location where you are going, if they give you a bus, this is the time it will take. If they take you by helicopter, this is the time it will take. And so they had a bit of negotiation back and forth. Initially they said, okay, we'll bring you 2 helicopters. So they bring 2 helicopters into the compound, and they said, okay, we'll take 2 helicopters because of the number of people, and we'll take them we'll take you to the airport. As they are leaving and they go to the helicopter, they realize there's not 4 or 5, there are 8 Palestinians. Well, basically almost double the number. Anyway, so they get on these 2 helicopters, they split up the hostages into 2, they take the hostages with them obviously. So they take the hostages with them, and the Palestinians also board the helicopters. The helicopters fly. Now the helicopter, and this is now in the evening, 10 p.m. Okay, so 10 p.m. they said, yeah, the prisoners will be swapped, we'll take you to the airport, you're going to fly out, and the prisoners will be released. So they go to the airport. Now the flight is supposed to be a short flight by helicopter. However, the flight takes longer than what was in the original plan. And they had been told that if the flight takes more than 30 minutes or takes longer than the time that has been designated from the Olympic Village to the international airport, then know that they're not taking you to the international airport, they're taking you somewhere else. And therefore be careful of an ambush. And so they sort of realized or guessed that there's something going on. Anyway, they took them to a NATO military airport. The helicopters land in the airport, 2 helicopters land in the airport, and the plan was this, and they had the head of Mossad was there alongside his assistant, and what the plan was that once the helicopters land, they have a Lufthansa airline plane on the tarmac. The helicopters will land in a place where the floodlights are lighting up the area, and thereafter when the 2 heads of the Palestinians, they will go to check the plane out. Those inside the plane are actually not hostesses and flight personnel, they're actually German military personnel. They will then kill the 2 assailants, the 2 Palestinians who come into the plane, and then they had snipers on all the rooftops who will kill the rest of the Palestinian attackers. However, the helicopters don't land in the exact right place that they're supposed to. The Palestinian, so this Isa, he takes one of his members of his team, and they go to check out the plane before they tell everybody else to get off the helicopters and join them. He goes inside, and when he goes to the plane, he has a grenade in his hand, and he has pulled the pin, and he goes inside because he suspected a setup. And so the ones in the plane knew that if they were trying to do anything, they're all dead because the grenade is going to go off. So they did nothing. And so he comes out. When he comes out of the plane, the snipers are shocked. They were supposed to have taken them. Anyway, they both come out the plane and they start walking down. The snipers shoot at them, but because they're not in the floodlights, they don't kill them. One of the both wounded. Isa was actually not wounded that badly. His assistant was wounded in his leg and his thigh, etc. Anyway, once that happens, a shootout takes place. The Palestinian fighters, they come, they start shooting towards the floodlights. A West German police officer is killed, and the floodlights are taken out. So there's not much light left anymore. Anyway, the shooting goes back and forth, and according to the reports and investigations, a lot of the Israeli hostages were killed in the crossfire, most likely by Germans. Anyway, they're not all killed at this point. Then, and one of the helicopters explodes. So one of the helicopters explodes. According to one report, Isa, or one of the hostage takers, blew up the grenade inside the helicopter. Another report is that one of the bullets from the snipers or from the Germans hit the fuselage of the helicopter, and therefore blew up the whole fuel tank, and thereafter, so the whole helicopter went up in flames. So apart from one body of the hostage who was in that helicopter, all the rest of the bodies were charged. One of them flew out and landed somewhere on the tarmac. So there's one helicopter left. The shooting stops. The reason why the shooting had stopped was because the Germans had run out of bullets. Anyway, so the Palestinians remain on the tarmac. There's nothing else happening, and they're just waiting to see what's happening. A few of the Palestinians have been killed, but there are still a number of Palestinians remaining. Eventually, a while later, maybe almost 1.5 hours, 1 hour later, German APCs come in with the military. The roads were all blocked, so it took them a while to come. Anyway, they arrive. As soon as they arrive, they open fire. There's back and forth of fire. Eventually, all the Israeli hostages are killed, and 5 out of 8 of the Palestinians are killed. 3 of the Palestinians survive. 2 of them were injured. 1 of them was not even injured. The 3 who are alive were Jamal al-Ghashi, Muhammad Safadi, and Adnan al-Ghashi. They are taken into custody. They are arrested by the Germans. Obviously, this was a huge collapse or failure on behalf of the Germans and Israel, and the head of Mossad was there as well. And so the 3 Palestinians are arrested. But it doesn't end there. The 5 other Palestinians, they're taken into, obviously they were killed, so they're taken by the Germans, they're put in freezers. Eventually those 5 are released, not much later. They're released on the 29th of October. So on the 29th of October, a Lufthansa flight 615 is hijacked by 2 Palestinians. It's a German plane with German citizens on board. And in Egypt, they demand a large sum of money, and so maybe £500,000, £1 million, I can't remember the exact amount, dollars, sorry. And they demand the release of the 3 Palestinians who survived and the bodies of the 5 who were killed. Germany gives them the money, releases the 5 who were killed and the 3 who survived, and they fly to Libya. So they're all taken to Libya. In Libya, there's a massive heroes welcome for all 3 of them, as well as the 5 who were killed, and their prayers and their funerals take place. The hijacking itself of this plane eventually turns out was actually an underhand agreement between the Germans and the Palestinians. The Germans did not want to hold the 3 Palestinian prisoners. So what they did was they told the members through the intelligence agencies that hijack a German plane with Germans on board, demand whatever this is the amount of money we'll be able to give you. So demand this money and demand that they be freed. Once you make the demands, we'll give into your demands, we'll give you the money, we'll give you the hostages, we'll release the bodies, you release the plane, you can go back to wherever you came from and everything will be fine. And it turns out that it was actually an agreement between the German intelligence and the Palestinians. Anyway, they were released. Israel obviously was not happy about everything that took place. They then started a series of assassinations. So 2 of the members were assassinated, and then Israel assassinated many Palestinian leaders under the pretext that they were members of Black September. Even though many of them, or majority of them, as Abu Dawood, who was a mastermind and he gave an interview much later on, said majority of those who were assassinated by Israel had absolutely no relationship to the Black September organization or any of the attacks that took place. They were just individuals that Israel wanted to get rid of, and so therefore under the pretext of Black September, they continued these assassinations for 20 years. For 20 years until 1993, the final assassination that linked to them. Even though in 1973, the Black September organization was officially declared as closed down and disbanded. But the assassinations continued. Abu Dawood himself was in Warsaw, and he was shot at close range by a Mossad agent in the hotel he was staying at. He was injured, but he chased after the assailant. The assailant escaped, and then eventually he was taken. He was fine. The Palestinians caught the assailant after 10 years and killed him. But the assassinations continued. It was after this event that majority of the Western countries then opened an anti-terror task force and group. So this was when the anti-terror police and organizations in majority of the Western countries came into existence after this event. There are a few things to note. As I said at the beginning, the attackers and the plan, as was described by Abu Dawood, and the attackers obviously they gave interviews once they landed in Libya. They said there was no plan to kill anyone, and we said that last week. In the majority of the hijackings, the plan wasn't to kill. The plan was to take hostages, to demand end of occupation, to demand freedom of prisoners, to demand certain rights, etc. So they said there was no plan to kill anyone. The two who were killed was because they attacked us. That's what they said. And obviously Israel refused to negotiate at all. After this event, there wasn't many international events that took place. Eventually, Fatah in 1973 and later on, they said we do not carry out any attacks outside of the West Bank and Gaza and occupied Palestine and the land of the State of Israel. Israel, obviously, they retaliated. So that was the 5th of September to the 6th of September. On the 8th of September, they then bombed Lebanon, and the Palestinian groups that had moved from Syria to Lebanon, so Jordan to Lebanon, as we said, they killed 200 Palestinians in bombings in Lebanon in retaliation to what took place in Munich 1972. Anyway, this was an important event which is mentioned a lot in history, so I thought that it's important for us to cover. After this, we'll move on now to the Yom Kippur War. So this was in 1973. It was from the 6th to the 25th of October, and it started on the 10th of Ramadan. So let's look at a bit of the background into what took place. So we had Jamal Abdel Nasser as the president of Egypt, and he was there with the Suez Canal crisis, and then thereafter the war that took place, where Israel has taken over the whole of the West Bank, has taken over the Golan Heights from Syria, taken over Gaza, and taken over the whole of the Sinai Desert. So they're basically running the Suez Canal and Bab al-Mandab and the straits there. And up to this point, since 1967, Israel is still occupying Egypt. So Anwar Sadat, he becomes the president in October 1970 of Egypt. He becomes the president of Egypt. So he replaces Jamal Abdel Nasser. And he was looking for peace. So he made a peace offer to Israel in 1971. What he said was that Israel basically give back the Sinai Desert to Egypt, and I'm happy. I'll sign a peace agreement, because what happened was there was what was called a war of attrition. So after the war officially ended in 1967, but skirmishes and small-scale attacks, either by sea or by land, continued all the way until 1971, and they were just back and forth. 1970, back and forth attacks were continuously going on. Palestinians were attacking Israeli targets. Israel would respond. Egyptian military would attack a few times. The ships would attack, shell some of the borders of the coastal areas against Israeli targets. So this war of attrition continues for a number of years. So Sadat says, I love peace, I want peace, let's agree, you remove yourself from Sinai Desert, give it back to us, it belongs to Egypt, and we're happy, we'll sign a peace agreement. He passes this message on to the US President Kissinger. He speaks to the Israelis. Israel says, no, we're not interested. And so the agreement doesn't take place. At the time, obviously, the US was heavily supporting Israel politically. Not as much militarily, although they were providing them with weapons. And as we said, Egypt was more on the side of the Soviets, the Soviet Union. So Anwar Sadat wanted the interests of the US, and he wanted the US on their side, on the side of Egypt. So what he did was that the Soviet advisors, or the Russian advisors who were there for Sadat, he expelled them from Egypt. He expelled them from Egypt in 1972. He expelled them thinking that the US would pay attention and start allying with Egypt. But it didn't make a difference. The US continued to support Israel. And so instead what he did was he planned and he prepared for war. And the purpose of the war was to take back the Sinai Desert. Yeah, because it's been occupied by Israel. They don't want any peace, and he's offered peace talks, so he wants to take it back. And also the Golan Heights to be returned back to Syria. Okay, so the Golan Heights to be returned back to Syria, and the Sinai Desert to be returned back to Egypt. There's no discussion of Gaza or the West Bank. Okay, so initially they start massing their troops and their artillery and their weapons, etc. So they are on the western border of the Red Sea, and of the Suez Canal, and the Israeli army is on the eastern banks. Yeah, because they've taken over the Sinai. So the Israeli army is on the eastern bank, the Egyptian army is on the western bank of the Suez Canal. So the Egyptian army starts building up its forces. At the same time, in the Golan Heights, to the east, where Syria is, they start massing their troops on the border close to the Golan Heights. Now, a few days before the 6th of October, King Hussein of Jordan, he visits Egypt. Thereafter he visits Syria. Thereafter he visits Israel and has a meeting with the Prime Minister of Israel and the Chief of Mossad. And he tells them that I think Syria is going to attack. He's been told. So he informs Israel that Syria is going to attack you in the Golan Heights. They ask him, will Egypt be involved? He said, I can't see how not. Meaning, yes, Egypt will also be involved. You say, okay. Anyway, King Hussein goes back to Jordan. The Israeli military apparatus and government, they're in a discussion. So Goldstein, Golda Meir, they're in a discussion. She's still the Prime Minister. Do you think that Egypt will attack? They said, based on our analysis of the Egyptian forces and the Syrian forces, they don't have the strength to attack us. They don't have the capacity, but let's just check. And so they take aerial images, and then they're surprised. They see that there are loads of Egyptian troops, etc., gathering on the borders of the Suez Canal, and the same thing in Syria. So they have internal meetings. They say, it seems like Egypt is getting ready for war. But they expected that anyway, because Egypt has said, this is a peace treaty, let's agree to the peace treaty, or else we'll have to take back what belongs to us, the Sinai Desert, by force. So they already knew that there were two options, either peace treaty or war for the Sinai Desert. When the war was, that was unknown, but it was guaranteed that a war was going to come. So Israel, they call their reservists and they prepare their army. They're ready for the attack. In fact, they prepare themselves for a preemptive strike against Egypt and Syria. However, they are advised by Kissinger and his advisors and warned, do not attack, do not do a preemptive strike, because if you do so, we won't give you anything. We won't give you as much as a nail, because we can't save face, because you've taken over the whole of Sinai and Golan Heights, which belongs to Syria and Egypt. If you were to now go further and start attacking Cairo and start attacking Damascus in a preemptive strike, we cannot support you. However, if you are shown to be defensive, then we can give you support. So do not do a preemptive strike. Let them strike first. Let them strike first. So this was agreed. They knew that they were going to attack. They knew that the attack was going to take place. They decided to wait until they had been attacked. However, they weren't prepared for the ferocity and the of the attack that took place. And so initially the Sadat at one point said, I am willing to sacrifice 1 million soldiers to take back the Sinai desert. And so they attack the Israeli positions on the eastern side of the Suez Canal really forcefully on the 6th of October. On the 6th of October. So it's Yom Kippur, it's a Saturday for the Jews. And so they attack. But the army was already prepared. However, within a few days they managed to take over a large part of the eastern bank, and within 3 days they've started to advance a few kilometers into the Sinai desert. The same thing in the Golan Heights. So the Syrian forces, they attack and they start to push back the Israeli forces, and the Israeli forces are getting pushed back. All the Israelis are waiting. They're waiting. They are trying to defend their positions, but they are still being pushed back. They weren't able to do, as they were in the previous war, a lot of aerial bombardment in these first few days. The reason is because Egypt was being funded by the USSR. As we said, they were taking weapons from them, and so they had got SAM anti-aircraft battery systems that they had put all across the western bank of the Suez Canal. And therefore, even though they weren't very effective in terms of anti-aircraft defense systems as compared to now, but they were still a repellent to repel the aircraft, the Israeli aircraft, from bombing inside and the forces, the Egyptian forces. And so even the few kilometers in front, they couldn't come, because as soon as the planes come any closer, they will be shot at by the anti-aircraft missiles. And so for a number of kilometers, 4 or 5 kilometers, the Egyptian forces push forward, and the Israeli army is unable, air force is unable to use their planes as effectively as they had. Anyway, after a few days, it comes to a stalemate. It comes to a stalemate of approximately 3 days. And these battles go back and forth, but the lines stay approximately stagnant. There's not much change. At this point, the USSR starts sending more arms to Egypt and to Syria. And so US starts arming openly, publicly Israel, the Israeli military. And they give them phantom aircraft, and they give them loads of weapons, and they arm them to the teeth, like what they are doing now. So this is the first war where they are fully arming Israel. And the reason, obviously, initially at that time, was they saw that this was part of the Cold War, proxies, USSR ally versus US ally. And so they start arming Israel, loads of weapons. And they say that's in response to the Soviets arming Egypt. And as Israel is our ally and Egypt is your ally, therefore you are arming against our ally, we'll arm our ally against yours. However, this took obviously a major escalation in terms of the political and military situation between the US and the USSR. So the armament of both sides starts. The number of soldiers on both sides, so according to the numbers, Israel had approximately 415,000, the Arab forces had about 900,000 to 1 million, if you included all of the countries, Syria and Egypt. So they're approximately double in terms of numbers. However, what happens is they wait until the 15th of October. Then on the 15th of October, the Israeli War Cabinet, they declare Operation Gazelle. And by this time what's happened is the Egyptian forces have pushed far beyond their SAM batteries. So now where they are located, they cannot shoot down the Israeli aircraft that would come to bomb their troops. And so what happens is the Israeli aircraft come and they start to bomb the Egyptian troops who have crossed into the Sinai desert. And thereafter they start to bomb the batteries as well and shoot them with missiles. Obviously they've just got more weapons from the US. Eventually they shoot down a lot of the batteries. Overall, based on the numbers, approximately 15 Israeli aircraft were shot down, whereas 200 Egyptian aircraft were shot down or destroyed. Anyway, so they come, then they start advancing. The Israeli army starts advancing. Initially it's slow, and what they have done is they have brought Ariel Sharon, who we've discussed previously in previous wars, as a commander of the Unit 101 in the massacre that took place, and thereafter in 1967. So they bring Ariel Sharon and they give him his unit and tell him to go forward. And he was, as always, brutal, killing, pillaging, destroying everything in his path as he advances. And he starts pushing the Egyptian army back. He pushes them back. And eventually they cross over the Suez Canal. And they go onto the western bank of the Suez Canal. And then they push back even further. They close the main highway from between Suez and Cairo until they're within 100 kilometers of the capital of Egypt, of Cairo. And their planes are able to go and bomb Cairo. And this is on the 22nd of October. In the Golan Heights, again, a similar scenario plays out. So the Syrian army first pushes back the Israeli army. Some of the Israeli units totally withdraw from the Golan Heights. And for a few days, it seems that there's an advance from the Syrian army. Then eventually, the Israeli army sends in their reinforcements. They send in their planes, and they start pushing back the Syrian army. And they go past the Golan Heights. They then enter into Syrian territory. They enter onto the main highway. They go closer and closer until they're within 40 kilometers of Damascus. They're basically on the doors of Damascus. And the planes are bombing Damascus continuously. They ask help, so some Jordanian forces go to help, some Saudi forces go to help, and some forces from here and there, but not really significant numbers, maybe a few thousand. So Israel is knocking on the door of Damascus, and Israel is knocking on the door of Cairo. So eventually, however, obviously this has heightened the tensions between the USSR and the US. And the US has to now carefully balance what's taking place, because Egypt is a USSR or Soviet ally, as is Syria. So on the 25th of October, so initially they have discussions on the 24th, and thereafter on the 25th of October, Kissinger makes a statement, and he gives a speech. Thereafter they have within an hour or two, they have a UN Security Council meeting under a resolution calling for a ceasefire and an end to the war. And so the war ends on the 25th of October. On the 25th of October 1973, the war comes to an end. And part of the rule agreement of the ceasefire is, obviously the Egyptians, they had to accept the ceasefire because they might lose the whole country otherwise, and as well as the Syrians. The initial ceasefire that was proposed was only accepted by Israel in the first few days when Egypt was on the offensive. A ceasefire was proposed and Israel straight away accepted because they were on the back foot and they had not received the US weapons, etc., and they were losing ground. Egypt and Syria, they refused to accept that ceasefire because they still hadn't taken back the whole of the Sinai Desert. They'd only got in about 4 kilometers. Anyway, this one they were forced to agree. US pressured Israel. They said, you have to agree to this ceasefire. It's very sensitive situation with the Soviets. Anyway, so they agree to the ceasefire, and this is the first time where there is a signed agreement and meeting between Israeli leaders and Arab leaders, and they sign with Syria and with Egypt a peace agreement. Casualties as a result of this war were 15,000 on the Arabs, so between Egypt and Syria and the Palestinian groups who were there, and on the Israeli side 2,000. And as a result of this war and the conduct of the Israeli troops and what they did in the way they were pillaging homes, villages, everything in their path, they were just destroying everything in their path. Because remember, they went further than the initial borders. They went into the mainland of Egypt, into the mainland Syria, past towns, past villages, and they were pillaging everything in their path. It was brutal killings, assassinations, etc. And so there was international condemnation of the conduct of the Israeli army. Even within Israel itself, Golda Meir had to resign as the Prime Minister of Israel as a result of this war. However, our man Sharon, he was called the King of Israel. When he returned back, he was the hero, and he was given a title by the Israelis as Sharon, the King of Israel, because of how he had pushed back mainly the Egyptian army. So this was, in summary, the events that took place in the Yom Kippur War in 1973. And this was basically the final war that took place. There's no other significant war in that sense between the other Arab states that took place following on. We'll talk about the repercussions and the impacts and the impact that this war had, and the effects it had on the Palestinians, etc. Next week, inshallah ta'ala. But for today, we covered the main events that took place during this war. If there are any questions, inshallah, before we finish in regards to what we discussed today. No? Yeah, so in terms of similarities that took place in the war in October 1973, it was October, and it was a Saturday, and it was an attack on Israel. There was, but yeah, as you're saying, there's a lot of similarities. So again, it was October, it was an attack on Israel. It wasn't a preemptive attack by Israel. Again, a lot of weapons were given by the US to Israel to defend itself. Israel had the right to defend itself at that time, as it does today, and the international policy. And obviously, there's a massive difference in that in 1973, the armies that were fighting against Israel, or the armies that Israel was fighting, were regular armies and troops of many different countries. Egypt, Syria, we had Jordanian troops, we had Saudi troops, some Iraqi troops, different countries. Their numbers were almost 1 million, according to different, as I said, so according to the different accounts. So you've got a massive number of, and then their weapons were much more advanced. They had planes, they had fighter jets. There were dogfights in the sky between Israeli jets and Egyptian jets trying to shoot each other down. All of them were won by the Israeli jets, except for one air fight wherein the Egyptian army pushed off, the Egyptian Air Force pushed off the Israeli Air Force. But yeah, so I mean, it was a full-scale war between armies of different countries. At the moment, it's they say that there are around 35 or 40,000 armed individuals in Gaza with basic weaponry, as compared to at that time they had 415,000. Currently, a number of troops who were called up for this operation in Gaza was about 450,000, and the total number of troops that, including the reservists, that Israel currently has is estimated to be 635 to 650,000. So again, the numbers are, there's no comparison in terms of numbers. So although there are comparisons in the actual reality of what's taking place on the ground, it's a bit different. Obviously here from the 6th to the 25th, about 20 days, 22 days. And now it's been 91 days. So obviously the number of days is different. The number of killed as well is 15,000. Now the number is over 22,000, 23,000 almost. And that's excluding those who are missing and unknown, excludes the West Bank, those numbers. While these countries, by the 25th of October, they said we have no choice, we have to sign the peace agreement. But it's now been 91 days in Gaza. We ask that Allah Azza wa Jalla alleviate the suffering. Any other questions? No? Okay, inshallah. So next week we'll cover the impact of this war and what it meant for Palestinians who were living up until this point still within an area that was completely controlled by Israel. So all of these areas are completely controlled. And as we're talking about these wars and everything, just go back to what we discussed last week with regards to the continuous displacement of Palestinians from their homes, harassment, torture, humiliation, arrest, etc. This is ongoing. This is continuously ongoing from 1948. Everyone who's living under Israeli control. And so, for example, when they came into Gaza in 1967, what they do is they'd line up all the Palestinians. They said every single man come out and gather in the courtyard. Who has weapons? Give us your weapons. Anyone who didn't give his weapons over, they say, if you don't give us your weapons, we're going to go house to house and do a search. If you don't give up your weapons, we'll destroy your whole house. We'll just demolish your home. And to set examples, they just went to a house across the road which has absolutely nothing to do with anything. They put a grenade inside. They come out, they said, we found a grenade, which they had put. The individual had nothing to do with anything else. He was not armed. He had no weapon in his home. They said, we found a grenade under his bed. They just destroyed his home. Then they went to the next area, destroyed another home there in the same way, and they said, look, we've destroyed these homes. Now all the rest of you, bring your weapons or we'll destroy all of your homes as well. And so some of them hid the weapons, but a lot of them gave their weapons back. And it's a similar thing that's happening in the West Bank now. So, for example, those individuals who are taken as prisoner or individuals who are wanted, they just destroy their homes. And you've probably seen this in the news where an individual is a prisoner in one of the Israeli prisons, administrative detention, or or in a military prison, and they'll just go and just destroy the home. They'll go with a bulldozer, bulldoze the home. A Palestinian carries out an attack, for example, against an Israeli target. They attack an Israeli checkpoint, identify the Palestinian, go to his home, drill holes in all the walls, put in explosives, demolish the home. Take out his parents and his wife and his children who are living there, go find somewhere else to stay. Leaders of the organizations, for example, they'll just destroy their homes just because the home belongs to this individual, even though maybe he hasn't been there for 10 years. But they'll go, they'll destroy his home. The family rebuild the home, they go again, destroy the home. They rebuild the home, they'll destroy the home. So it continues. Until today, the same methodology is being used. It's been used many times in the last 3 months in the West Bank. And in Gaza, obviously, they just destroy everything that they can see. Whether they find weapons or not, they can easily claim that we find weapons inside the MRI room, where obviously you cannot take any piece of weapon inside near an MRI scanner, because even if you go with a ring, it'll fly off your hand, if not take your hand with you to the machine once it's switched on. So anyway, their policy continues, and the humiliation and torture is still, while all of these events are taking place, those are still continuing, as we said, within to the Palestinians who are living there. We ask that Allah Azza wa Jal alleviate their suffering, remove the oppression, grant them freedom, grant them victory, and may Allah Azza wa Jal grant them all the rights that they have in the court of Allah, and may Allah Azza wa Jal remove from them all kinds of oppression and tyranny, and grant them all, and all the Muslims around the world, especially our brothers and sisters in Sudan also, who are undergoing very difficult circumstances. May Allah Azza wa Jal alleviate their suffering and the oppression that they are going through, and grant the Ummah peace and serenity and prosperity and victory. Ameen. Wa akhiru da'wana alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Subhanallah wa bihamdihi, subhanaka Allahumma wa bihamdik, nashhadu an la ilaha illa anta, nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk.